Breaking news now. Putin and Xi, it must be difficult to admit error in your position as dictator. How low would a world leader have to get before approaching Kim Jong-un on their hands and knees? What does North Korea have that a respectable country like yours could possibly want? Those who are worried that the Ukrainian counteroffensive isn't going as well as planned can look into other options. At one point in his life, Vladimir Putin considered himself on par with Charlemagne and Alexander the Great. Now he's begging money from James Buchanan of Asia. You didn't have to be a master of body language interpretation to understand the picture. The somber, black-suited delegation of Russians and North Koreans stiffly paraded for the cameras, looking like a break from funeral director school, with Putin looking like he'd rather be at the Ukrainian front and Kim unsuccessfully trying not to look like a ninth-grade girl who just scored a date with the senior pulling guard. But the self-proclaimed great and powerful Putin had to go through with the trampoline act, humiliating as it was. Russia is desperate for any kind of explosive, and old Potato Head has been starving his people to pay for questionable weapons. It's not a bad idea to give it a shot. Putin fed Kim fine beef, crab, and sturgeon before he boxed back into his railcar, which had a top speed of 37 miles per hour, waved goodbye, and presumably tried to erase the entire encounter from Kim's memory. Putin was made to look a little bit weak by Prigozhin, God rest his soul, if there is one. But to have to beg the bat-dung crazy head of state of the world's, like, 180th most important country? Ouch. This is not the action of a peaceful country. Along Russia's southern border, President Xi Jinping must be thanking his lucky Chinese stars that the world's attention was diverted briefly from China's deteriorating situation and instead focused on Russia. A nation with the GDP of a lemonade stand is a long way from Xi and China having to go hat in hand. However, things aren't looking good. China, which has struggled to master capitalism, might secretly long for Russia's cruder economy, which is based on raw materials like oil, metals, and timber. China, like the rest of the world in 2008, was hit hard by the worldwide economic downturn. And the government, following policy, invested heavily to boost the economy. Some trains, towers, and industrial parks were actually necessary, but the government was able to get around borrowing restrictions by creating financial vehicles that made the purchases on credit. Of course, the United States of America had its own stimulus programs running at the same time. The United States invested in its people, while China poured money into concrete. More hiring and investment were made possible by George W. Bush's tax rebates and rate cuts for businesses. Money from Barack Obama's budget went toward healthcare, energy, schools, and daycare. While consumer spending drives economic expansion in the West, government spending is what drives China's economy. Consumer spending is restorative, while government boondoggles usually only generate temporary economic activity during their construction. Because the government does not adequately provide for their retirement, the Chinese save a large portion of their income throughout their lives. Even though they are often criticized, Americans are able to keep the economy going strong thanks to Social Security and Medicare. As a result, after taking a financial hit from COVID, the United States was free to invest in programs that would directly benefit its people, while China was left without the ability to buy consumer goods on credit. Why doesn't China just copy the West? Perhaps, if the autocratic Xi hadn't come to power. Putin and Xi both have that arrogant, superior to all others attitude. Xi, being an old-fashioned authoritarian snob, thus cannot see that the West is onto something economically. His moralistic distaste for bailouts and the idea that anyone might get something for nothing makes him popular in conservative think tanks but serves no useful purpose in the real world. As we avert our gaze in preparation for yet another budget showdown on home soil, we can take heart in knowing that there are still two sides prepared to duke it out, no matter how silly or pointless the conflict may seem. Maybe a quarter of the American public would vote to make their hero dictator for life, but they should think about what happens when they do. When it becomes clear that they are not the brightest bulbs in the room, they not only fail, but they bring their entire countries down with them.